Hello there and welcome to the Card Grotto. Today I'm going to be doing some simple Copic colouring with this really cute image here from Pretty Pink Posh, and I'm going to be talking about some of my favourite colour combinations with Copic markers. To start off my card, I'm going to stamp the image. This is the Koala Friends stamp set from Pretty Pink Posh, and I'm going to be using one of the images at the top. This was kindly gifted to me for Christmas from a friend and I think it's absolutely adorable. So I'm going to stamp that down onto some smooth white cardstock with Memento Tuxedo black ink. I really like this ink for Copic colouring because it doesn't bleed or anything like that with the alcohol markers. And I'm using the mini MISTI here just so that I can double stamp that. So next I'm going to grab hold of my Copic markers. I'm going to use some warm greys for the koala. I need some greens for the foliage and then also some browns for the tree bark. I often get asked what my favourite colours are with Copic markers and my favourite colour combinations, and quite often I pick from the Copic colour chart here. So say for example I want to colour something brown, I might pick E57 as my mid-tone and then I may want a lighter and a darker shade. So I go to the colour chart and I see which is the lighter shade and which is the darker shade. In this case it's the E55 is the lighter shade and the E59 is the darker shade, and in general those three colours are going to blend quite nicely together. They don't always, but most of the time they do. But I also like to use the hex chart from Sandy Allnuck as well. You can buy this from her website, and how she has it laid out is not by numerical order with Copic markers, but by the different colours. So say for example again I wanted to use the E57, I'll find it on the hex chart and I can see which colours blend quite nicely with it, and not necessarily in number order, and this gives a really great idea of different colour combinations that you can use as well, and especially helpful if you don't have all of the Copic colours. So I'll have a link to this chart down below in the description box on YouTube and over on my blog as well. But I'll be honest with you, I do stick to the colour combinations that I know and I've used for a long time. I'm not very adventurous, but I really love using warm greys for critters. Like the name suggests, I think that they give it a bit of warmth and a bit of character to the animal. So I'm going in here with my darkest shade. This is the W8. And I find with grey markers you can often miss out shades in between. So say for example you may want to use a W7 and then a W5, a W3 and a W1, and you can miss out these shades in between, and I still think it gives a really good blend between them, but sometimes you may want to use the colours in between as well. So to start off with, like I said, I'm going in with the W8 for the darkest colours, and here I've skipped a shade and I'm going in with the W6 to blend that out. So I'm going over where I have already coloured with the W8, blending that out and moving the colour over towards the right hand side. I like to colour darkest from lightest. That's just personally how I think blends quite nicely for me, but you could do it the other way around as well if you wanted to. I'm thinking that the light source is coming from the right hand side, but I don't always go with the light source when I'm colouring. I like to have fun when I'm colouring, so sometimes I just pick an image and just colour it whichever way I want to and not necessarily worry about the light source. So here I'm going in with the W5, which is the next shade down. I could have jumped to the W4, but I particularly like the W5 as a shade. So I'm going to go in again, I'm going over what I've already coloured in and bringing that colour over towards the right hand side. Just adding a bit more here on that large koala's face. And then here I went in and jumped to the W3 and decided that I wanted a shade in between. So I'm going back in with the W4. Usually I do jump from the 5 to the 3, but in this case I wanted a really nice smooth blend, and so I just used that W4 in between. And then I can go back in with the W3 and just blend that out further. So for the lighter shades, I do go over what I've already coloured, but not all the way to the other side. So not all the way over to the left-hand side where I use the W8, because often the lighter colours do bleach out the darker colours. So I just tend to go over the lighter shades. So here I'm using the W2. Again, quite often I will just jump to the W1, But here again, I wanted a bit more of a smoother blend, so I'm going to go in with the W1. And I feel that I got a really nice blend between the W8 and the W1. And there's quite a nice bit of contrast between the darker areas and the lighter areas. So I'm just going back in with the W3 just to make sure that I've got quite a nice blend in between. So now I'm going to move on to the tree bark, and this is one of my favourite colour combinations for wood. This is E59 that I'm going in with first. It's quite a dark shade of brown. And then I'm going to blend that out with the E57. These are quite similar in kind of depth of colour, I suppose. So they blend really nicely together. And then for my lighter shade, I'm going to use E55. And this is quite a bit lighter than the other two. But if you go over it quite a few times, they do blend quite nicely together. The only thing that I find is that it does bleach out some of the colour quite often. So I do go back in with the mid-tone shade, which is the E57, and just add a bit more darkness to that darker side. So just blending that out. And it does look quite nice as it is, but I do want that side to be a bit darker. So that's the E57. And then I do go back in with the E55 and just make sure that that's completely blended. Although the paper is quite wet at this point, so I probably could have got away with not using that E55 again. I went over the koala a little bit there, so I'm using the W1 just to push that back out. Which is the good thing with Copic markers, because you can bleach colours out again. So this is another of my favourite colour combinations, and this is for green, and I often use this colour combination for leaves. So my darkest shade is YG67, and then I'm using YG17, YG23, and then the YG01. Quite often I add in YG03 as well, but this is such a small area that I didn't feel that I needed to. And that's quite a nice bright green. And then for the ears of the koalas, I'm just using R12 and then R000. And that's the colouring completed. I'm pretty happy with how that's come out. It's very simple, but I do like it. So now I can cut out the image with the coordinating die. So I'm just going to place that over the top, stick that down with some low tack tape and run that through my die cutting machine. Next I'm going to work on the card base. So I have an A2 sized white card base here. This is a finished size of 5.5 by 4.25. And this is an American A2 sized card, and I want to do some ink blending on the background. So I'm using the MFT Cloud Stencil here and some Tumbled Glass Distress Oxide ink. I'm just going to blend that over the stencil, and how I like to do it is I like to work on the stencil first and move the blending tool onto the cardstock. I find that I get a nice smooth blend that way. And you'll see that I do tap off quite a bit of excess ink onto a scrap piece of paper. And that way, again, I feel that I get quite a nice smooth blend. And it's quite a light application, so I can just go over it as many times as I want to for it to be as dark as I need to. So I'm just going to change the sides of the stencil here for the different edges. And just work my way up using the Distress Oxide ink. I do apologise that it's really a light colour here, so it's difficult to see on camera, but in the finished photographs you can see it a bit better. I'm going to add a piece of cardstock to the top and the bottom, so I don't need to cover the whole area, but I just want to make sure that where I need it to be covered is covered. So I'm just going back in here to the bottom right hand corner just to fill in that gap. So here I've added that card base back into the mini MISTI, and I've placed the panel of cardstock on the bottom and also my image here. They're not stuck down, but I want to stamp my sentiment. And so what I've done is I have placed a plastic sheet on top of the card, and I'm going to use that to align my sentiment. So this is a piece of plastic that has come from some knitting pattern templates or some sewing pattern templates. I'm not 100% sure which one, but I really like it because I can stamp onto this plastic, and then if it's not in the right place, the sentiment, I can move it around, I can move the stamp around, and I can make sure that it's exactly where I want it to be before I actually stamp it on my card. So I can just wipe away that ink, move it around until I'm happy with it. Once I'm happy with it, I can take everything out of the mini MISTI here and just stamp that sentiment down directly onto the card base. So I'm using Memento Tuxedo black ink for that again, and I'm just going to double stamp that. I'm stamping onto Oxide ink, which is an opaque ink, so I did really want a nice dark image there. I've stuck a panel of white cardstock onto the top of the card base. I just cut that down and added that with some foam tape, and here I've got the bottom portion, and I'm just going to add some foam tape onto the bottom of that. So I'm using quite a bit of foam tape. And then I can work out where I want my koala image to be. So I want the koalas to be stuck down flat towards the bottom underneath where that panel is, and then up above where the top panel is. So I'm just going to use some foam tape and cut that down for the top portion of the image. And then I'm using some tape runner just to stick that down where the other portions stick at the bottom, and then also that little branch there at the top, which is going to overlap that top panel. So I can just use some tweezers here just to get that in place. And then once I'm happy with where it is, I can just stick that down. And then I can just stick the bottom panel down as well. And then to finish off the card, I just wanted to emphasize the eyes of the koalas. So I'm using a black glaze pen here just to go over those, and I could have done the noses as well, but I wanted to really make their eyes pop. And that's the card finished for today. A really simple card, but I do like how it came out. Links to the products that I used will be in the description bar on YouTube and also over on my blog. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.